Today, we're going to take a look at the Boss CE-3 chorus pedal. We're going to open it up, give it all new capacitors, dial in the perfect bias, and then give it a listen and figure out once and for all, does the CE-3 deserve more love? Or was it just another unnecessary product of the 80s? The Boss CE-1 was a pedal version of the chorus and vibrato effect found in the legendary Jazz Chorus 120 amp. In 1979, Boss took most of the features found in the CE-1 and crammed them into this new compact pedal format that everyone seemed to really enjoy, giving us the CE-2. And then in 1982, the CE-3 was released as a refresh of the CE-2, sporting stereo outputs and this rad sparkle blue paint job. So why does the CE-2 get all the love if this is the upgrade? Does this? Really sound worlds different than this? Well, perhaps the first thing to keep in mind is that when the CE-2 first came out, it used an MN3207 chip as part of its bucket brigade delay circuit. As that chip went out of production, they replaced it with the MN3207, which was, at least according to a few experts, not as good because it clips at a lower signal strength, meaning we have less non-clipping headroom to play around in, resulting in more noise. Most made-in-Japan CE-2s have the 3007s. Most made-in-Taiwan CE-2s, like this one right here, have the inferior 3207. So if that first clip didn't knock your socks off, maybe that's why. So that CE-2 that everyone puts on a pedestal isn't just any old CE-2, it's specifically one of the earlier ones with that chip. And when Boss decided to update their chorus pedal with the CE-3, they continued with the MN3207, the perhaps not quite as good chip, but the CE-3 added something the CE-2 didn't have: stereo outputs. And actually, these require a bit of an explanation. You probably already know that the chorus effect is just vibrato plus the original signal, and vibrato is just the original signal pitched up and down based on a low frequency oscillator. The CE-3 gives us two modes. That's what this third dial is for. Mode 1 is essentially mono times 2. Both outputs are identical. It's the full chorus effect, just like the CE-2. Mode 2 sends the direct signal to the top output, which sounds like this. And then the vibrato signal comes out the lower output, giving us this. And the idea there is that you're using a stereo amp or 2 amps, and the chorus effect is created in the space around the speakers rather than inside the pedal. I would demonstrate that for you right now, but I'm using a real amp and my setup is a mono setup, so sorry. Now, there's more to a pedal than just the delay chips that are in it and this handy-dandy stereo option. There are some subtle voicing changes in here, or as one commenter on the internet said, in their attempt to implement a lot of stereo features, they really fuck the tone up. Really? I mean, chorus was definitely a big fad of the 80s and 90s. It always makes me want to play some In Excess or Police or Tears for Fears. I guess I just don't get being into vintage style chorus and saying this is perfect and this is garbage. I mean, I used to order a Sprite knowing that they're gonna offer Sierra Mist, but if all they have is Starry, then I'm just gonna drink water. If I'm covering a Tears for Fears song that calls for a CE2 and all I can find is a CE3, the song is gonna get played with a CE3 and no one at the gig who isn't staring at my pedal board is gonna know the difference. I mean, it is a bit of an oddball pedal. It's the only Boss pedal with these 3 knobs in a row like this, which makes it really hard to see the status light up there when it's down on the floor in front of you. Like the CE2, it used the older ACA style power adapter, and the Bass Boat Sparkle finish was perhaps just a little too far ahead of its time. But that got me thinking, maybe the reason people don't like the CE3 is because they bought one that isn't working right. I mean, the electrolytic capacitors and pedals start to dry out over time and it can cause all sorts of problems. This pedal is probably close to 40 years old. How do I know it's actually electrically correct at this point? Well, before I did anything at all, I recorded a quick clip to establish a baseline. Then I went through and I desoldered all 8 capacitors. I used desoldering braid to wick up the old solder. I triple checked the values of the capacitors that I pulled out against the schematic and the service manual, and I replaced them with all new electrolytic capacitors that should last another 30 years. I also went and modified this to accept a standard 9-volt PSA style power adapter as long as I was in there, and there are other mods that people do. Maybe we'll revisit those at some point, but right now I want this to be as close to bone stock as possible. So I clipped the leads, buttoned it all back up. Let's see if it actually sounds any different. Alright, so now that we've got all brand new capacitors, we should also make sure that the bucket brigade circuit is biased correctly. According to the service manual, if we feed a 200 Hz sine wave on the input and then monitor transistor Q8's emitter, we should see a nice centered sine wave on our oscilloscope. That's right, I have an oscilloscope now. I guess you could say things are getting pretty serious. As I adjust this trim pot, we can see the waveform start to take a shape where it is indeed a centered waveform with just a little bit of flattening on the top and the bottom, but in equal parts. I'm still new to the whole oscilloscope thing, but I'm pretty sure this is right where it ought to be. And it was indeed a few degrees off from where it was when I started. So there should be an improvement. Let's give it a listen. Real quick, sometimes people ask me why I don't mess around with the trim pots on the insides of some of the pedals that I show here. And look, if they're labeled or they're mentioned in the instructions, then sure, they're probably fair game. And even with this, there's just one trim pot on the inside. I could probably set it by ear if I needed to, but once you start tweaking the trim pots on something like the JHS Panther Cub, just because some guy on the internet said that it makes it sound more watery or more transparent or something like that, you could wind up essentially bricking the pedal. So, moral of the story, don't go messing with mystery trim pots. Please stick to the labeled knobs and switches you're used to. Now, as for those comparison clips, let's replay just a few seconds from each one as a refresher so they're all right there in our mind. In that third clip, I'm hearing what I think is a little more definition and an overall more pleasing and less busy modulation effect, especially around the A and the D string frequencies. However, I'm not the world's most consistent guitar player. I also put the guitar down and did a bunch of stuff between each one of those recordings, so there's going to be some variance built into that. There's also the placebo effect. People who do mods are always going on about how the vintage diode they bought from eBay really makes the pedal come alive, and how those new old stock 1458 chips they put in their Tube Screamer, now they're going to start getting all those gigs. No, we tend to hear what we want to hear, and we want to believe that our investment of time and or money was worth it. And I think I'm being objective, but this wasn't the world's most scientific experiment. If I could go back in time, I'd record the comparison clips a little bit differently, which I plan on doing when I restore this Boss PH1R phaser. How's that for a teaser? So I don't need to tell you that I've got some exciting stuff coming up. As for the CE-3, it's a fine vintage style chorus pedal. It's certainly not my favorite. That distinction probably goes to the Ibanez CS9. But if you're after the CE2 sound without paying CE2 prices, the CE3 is the Sierra Mist to the CE2's Sprite, and I will take no further questions on that. I'll catch you on the next one.